There is a painting almost every one of us has seen without ever really looking at it. A soft-faced figure with two feathered wings, standing gently in a shaft of light, hands folded, expression serene. It hangs in churches. It sits on greeting cards. It has shaped what billions of people picture the moment they hear the word angel, and almost none of it comes from the Bible. Somewhere in the 6th century before Christ, a priest in exile sat by a river in Babylon and saw something that would never fit on a greeting card. He did not see a gentle winged figure. He saw 4 faces on a single head. He saw legs like polished bronze, straight as pillars, ending in feet shaped like a calf's hoof. He saw wings that touched one another in a wall of motion, and fire, real fire, moving back and forth between living bodies like something breathing. He wrote it down exactly as he saw it, in careful, controlled Hebrew, because he understood that no one would believe him unless he was precise. That man was Ezekiel. The text is Ezekiel chapter 1, expanded and clarified in chapter 10. And once you read what is actually written there in the words actually used, it becomes very hard to look at the greeting card angel the same way again. This is not a reinterpretation. It is not a theory. It is simply what the passage says, decoded piece by piece, the way Ezekiel himself seems to have wanted it read. Slowly, deliberately, so that nothing was mistaken for something softer than it was. The man who saw too much. To understand why this vision looks the way it does, you have to understand where Ezekiel was standing when he saw it. He was not in Jerusalem. He was not in the temple. He was a priest without a temple, a man trained his whole life for sacred service who had been dragged into exile in Babylon along with the rest of Judah's leading families. The text places him by the Chebar Canal, an irrigation channel in a foreign land, among a defeated people who had every reason to believe their God had been defeated with them. Babylon's gods had statues. Babylon's gods had temples you could walk into and see. Judah's God, by contrast, seemed to have vanished along with the ark and the sacrifices and the priesthood Ezekiel had trained his whole life to serve. It is into that specific despair that the vision breaks open. Ezekiel describes a windstorm coming from the north, a great cloud with fire flashing back and forth, and a brightness around it. This is not decoration. In the ancient Near East, storm imagery from the north regularly signaled the approach of a king or a god in power. Ezekiel's audience would have felt the weight of that immediately. Something enormous was arriving. And what arrives is not a comforting scene. It is closer to an engine of glory, alive and moving. And at the center of it are 4 living creatures whose appearance Ezekiel struggles, almost visibly, to put into ordinary language. It helps to remember what kind of writer is holding the pen here. Ezekiel was not a poet reaching for effect, and he was not a mystic content to leave things blurred. He was trained in priestly categories, in exact measurements, in the careful distinctions between clean and unclean, holy and common, that governed temple service. This is a man whose entire vocation had been built around precision. So when a writer like that resorts again and again to the language of likeness and appearance rather than flat statement, it is not vagueness. It is the vocabulary of someone who has been trained to be exact, encountering something that exceeds every category he has been trained in, and refusing to pretend otherwise by flattening it into something simpler than it was. That struggle matters. Read carefully, and you notice Ezekiel repeatedly reaching for comparison rather than description. Something like burnished bronze, a likeness of a throne, an appearance like fire. He is not being vague for effect. He is doing the only thing possible when a human being tries to describe something that does not belong to the categories human language was built for. That tension between precise Hebrew vocabulary and the impossibility of the thing being described is the first clue that whatever these beings are, they were never meant to be tame. 4 faces, not one. Start with the detail most people skip past without registering. These creatures do not have one face turned outward, like every painted angel ever produced. Ezekiel says each of the 4 living creatures had 4 faces. Not 4 different angels with 4 different faces. 4 faces on a single head, facing 4 directions at once. The specific faces matter, and they were almost certainly chosen with care. Ezekiel names a human face, a lion's face, an ox's face, and an eagle's face, one on each side of the same head. In the ancient world, and specifically within Israel's own symbolic vocabulary, these 4 creatures represented something close to the summit of creation in their respective domains. The lion is the most powerful and feared of the wild animals. The ox is the strongest and most valuable of the domesticated animals, central to worship and to daily survival. The eagle rules the sky, seeing what nothing else can see from where nothing else can go. And the human face represents the pinnacle of God's creative work, the being made in the divine image. Held together on a single head, facing every direction simultaneously, these 4 faces seem to be saying something about totality. Nothing in creation escapes the gaze of what Ezekiel is describing. There is no blind side, no direction these beings cannot see, no domain of creation, wild, domesticated, airborne, or human, that goes unrepresented in their very anatomy. Many interpreters see in this an embodied statement about the reach of God's rule and the comprehensiveness of what stands nearest his throne. This is not a being you sneak past. It does not have a back turned to anything. Compare that to how angels are almost always painted. A single serene human face, gazing gently in one direction, at peace, at rest. The difference is not cosmetic. A single calm face invites the viewer to feel safe. 4 faces turned outward in every direction, unblinking, all at once, does something else entirely. It communicates vigilance without pause. Ezekiel is not describing a being that is available to be softened into a comforting glance. He is describing something built for total, unbroken awareness. There is also something worth noticing in how these 4 faces relate to the direction the creatures move. Because each creature had a face oriented toward each of the 4 points, the whole formation could advance in any direction without ever needing to turn its collective body around. Whichever way the group needed to go, a face was already looking that way, already leading. Nothing had to reposition. Nothing had to catch up. It is a strange kind of design, and it becomes even stranger once you notice that this is not simply a description of appearance, it is a description of function. The 4 faces are not only symbolic, they are operational, built into the very shape of how these creatures move through space. Legs like burnished bronze. Move down from the faces to the legs, and the text becomes almost architectural. Ezekiel describes the legs of these creatures as straight, and their feet as being like the sole of a calf's foot, sparkling like the color of burnished bronze. This is a small detail that most readers glide right past, but it rewards a closer look. Straight legs are not how living things typically move. Human legs bend. Animal legs bend. The bending joint is what allows for the ordinary business of walking, turning, and adjusting. Ezekiel specifically denies these creatures that ordinary mechanism. Their legs are straight, rigid, more like polished columns than jointed limbs. And their feet do not end in the soft or clawed shapes you would expect from a walking creature. They end like a calf's hoof, small, rounded, almost balanced on a single point of contact with the ground. Set alongside the bronze coloring, sparkling and metallic, the effect is less like an animal and more like something forged. Bronze in the ancient world was associated with strength, durability, and often with divine or royal contexts, the metal of altars, of temple furnishings, of things meant to endure heat and pressure without breaking down. A creature with legs like burnished bronze is not soft-bodied in any sense. It is built for permanence. It does not tire the way flesh tires. It does not bend under strain the way a joint eventually does. And this connects to something Ezekiel says just afterward, that these creatures did not turn as they went, but each one went straight forward. Read alongside the straight, unbending legs, this begins to make a strange kind of sense. A being with rigid, columnar legs and hoofed feet, capable of moving in any of four directions without needing to physically turn its body, is not a being designed the way ordinary creatures are designed. It is a being engineered around directness, stability, and unbroken forward motion, wherever the spirit that moved it chose to go. Nothing here suggests fragility. Nothing here suggests softness. The imagery is closer to a living structure than to a delicate winged figure hovering in the air. It is worth pausing on why a prophet describing the throne of God would bother including a detail as small as the shape of a foot. Nothing in this vision is incidental. Ezekiel is a priest, trained to notice the difference between what belongs in sacred space and what does not, and every element he records seems chosen to communicate something about the nature of what stands nearest to God. A calf's hoof is small, sealed, almost a single point of contact with the ground, nothing splayed or grasping about it. Paired with legs that cannot bend, the whole limb reads less like something that walks the way animals walk, and more like something that simply moves in whichever direction it is sent, without the ordinary mechanics of striding, pivoting, or adjusting that every walking creature we know depends on. Wings that touch. Now the wings, which is where church art has perhaps drifted furthest from the text. The familiar image gives an angel two wings, spread wide, often in a graceful, individual arc, framing a single figure in isolated majesty. Ezekiel gives each creature four wings and specifies something the paintings almost universally omit: the wings touched one another. This detail is easy to read past, but it is doing real work in the passage. Two of each creature's wings stretched upward, and where they met the wings of the creature beside them, they touched, forming something closer to a wall or a canopy than four separate individuals standing near one another. The other two wings covered the creature's own bodies. This is not a loose grouping of independent winged beings who happen to be near each other. It is a single, interlocking structure, wing joined to wing, moving as one coordinated mass rather than four individuals doing their own thing. Later, in chapter 10, Ezekiel adds a detail that deepens this picture even further. The sound of these wings was like the sound of many waters, like the voice of the Almighty, like the noise of a great army on the march. This is not the quiet rustle of a single dove-like wing you might imagine from religious art. This is an overwhelming, layered sound, powerful enough to be compared to the ocean, to military force, and, most strikingly, to God's own voice. Whatever these wings sounded like, it was not gentle. It carried the weight of massed, coordinated power moving through the air. What emerges from these details is not an angel in the individualized, personal sense so many people picture, a solitary heavenly messenger with its own quiet presence. It is closer to a formation, a tightly joined, wing-linked unit that moves and turns and stops together in total unison, as though every part is governed by a single will running through all of them at once. Many readers of Ezekiel understand this synchronized, interlocking structure as a visual statement about order under God's throne, absolute coordination with no independent motion, nothing acting alone or out of step with the whole. Ezekiel underlines this unity with one more small but telling detail. He says that wherever the Spirit was to go, the creatures went, and they did not turn as they went. Whatever governed their movement was singular and shared, not four separate wills happening to agree, but one directing impulse running through four joined bodies at once. When you hold that alongside the touching wings, the picture becomes coherent in a way that is easy to miss on a first read. This is not a crowd of angels standing near each other by coincidence. It is one coordinated structure, built from four, moving as though it were a single living thing. Fire that moves between them. Then comes the detail in the title, the one that turns this from strange into something closer to unsettling. Coals of fire, moving between the living creatures. Ezekiel describes the appearance of the creatures as being like burning coals of fire, like torches, with fire moving back and forth among them, and brightness, with lightning going out from the fire. This is not fire surrounding the scene as a kind of glowing backdrop, the way it is often painted in religious art, a halo effect at a safe distance. The text places the fire in motion between the bodies of the living creatures themselves, weaving among them, active and mobile. Not static illumination, but something closer to a living current running through the formation. Chapter 10 makes this even more vivid and, in some ways, more dangerous. There, a figure clothed in linen is instructed to go in among the wheels beneath the cherubim and fill his hands with burning coals from between the cherubim, scattering them over the city under judgment. The coals are not just visual atmosphere. They are functional. They are taken up and used, an instrument of divine action passing through and out of the space where these living beings stand. Think about what that means for the mental image church art usually provides. We are not looking at a lightly glowing figure standing in a beam of soft sunlight. We are looking at something closer to a moving furnace, four-faced, bronze-legged, wing-linked bodies with actual, functional fire circulating among them, fire that a human hand can reach into and remove for the purpose of judgment. This is not a comforting scene. It is a vision built to communicate danger alongside glory, holiness that is not safe to approach carelessly. The prophet Isaiah, standing before a similar throne vision, cried out that he was ruined, a man of unclean lips, in the presence of that holiness. Ezekiel's reaction is nearly identical. He falls on his face. He does not walk calmly toward the light. He is overwhelmed to the point of collapse. This is worth connecting back to what fire meant within Israel's own worship. Fire on the altar was never simply light or warmth. It was the visible sign of a sacrifice being accepted, of something offered being consumed and taken up into God's presence. Fire that consumes has always sat close to holiness in the biblical imagination, from the burning bush that did not burn up, to the pillar of fire that led Israel through the wilderness, to the fire that fell on Solomon's altar at the temple's dedication. Coals moving between living beings at the foot of God's throne belong to that same current of meaning. This is not fire as backdrop. It is fire as the visible edge of a holiness that both purifies and judges, depending on what it touches. What Ezekiel 10 adds. Chapter 1 gives the first sighting. Chapter 10, later in the book, gives Ezekiel a second, closer look at the same vision, this time explicitly naming what these creatures are. Cherubim, the same class of being stationed at the entrance to Eden after the fall, the same beings woven into the fabric, covering the Ark of the Covenant and carved into the walls of Solomon's temple. Ezekiel writes plainly that these were the living creatures he saw by the Chebar Canal, and that he then understood them to be cherubim. Chapter 10 also adds one more detail that most people never hear about, and it deserves careful, honest treatment. Ezekiel describes the wheels beside the creatures, and the creatures themselves, as being full of eyes all around, on their rims, their backs, their hands, and their wings. Eyes, covering the surfaces of these already overwhelming beings. This is not decorative excess. Within the vision's own logic, it extends the same idea carried by the four faces: total, unbroken perception. Nothing hidden from view. Nothing able to move unseen in the presence of what these creatures represent. Careful readers also notice a small but honest textual detail worth mentioning directly rather than smoothing over. In Chapter 1, the fourth face on each creature is described as the face of an ox. In Chapter 10, describing what appears to be the very same vision, that fourth face is called the face of a cherub. Many interpreters understand this as Ezekiel clarifying, on second sight, that the ox-like face he saw the first time was in fact the face proper to a cherub, a being whose form these other three faces surrounded and completed. This is not a contradiction to hide from. It is the kind of detail that gives the vision credibility precisely because Ezekiel does not smooth it over for the reader. He reports what he saw both times, even where the language shifts slightly, because his concern throughout is accuracy, not polish. Why the softening happened. If all of this is in the actual text, in plain Hebrew that has been available and translated for centuries, why does almost no religious art reflect it? The honest answer is layered, and no single cause fully explains it. Part of it is simply the demand of visual art itself. A four-faced, bronze-legged, fire-threaded, eye-covered being is extraordinarily difficult to paint or sculpt in a way that remains recognizable, let alone devotional. Artists across centuries, working within the conventions of their own traditions, often reached for the more paintable form, a single graceful winged human figure, because it could actually be rendered and because it fit within existing artistic language for depicting the sacred and the beautiful. Part of it is theological drift shaped by centuries of use. As angel imagery moved from Ezekiel's specific throne vision into general devotional art, guardian angel piety, and later, greeting cards and nursery decoration, the original terror and glory of the vision was gradually replaced by warmth and comfort, qualities that serve the emotional needs of worshipers seeking reassurance rather than the specific, controlled, almost architectural vision of a prophet, trying to describe the throne room of God. And part of it may simply be human discomfort with the text as written. A single calm face is easier to sit with than four unblinking ones. A quiet, folded wing is easier to imagine than a formation whose sound resembles an advancing army. Fire circulating between living bodies is harder to domesticate than a soft halo. Over enough centuries, the version that comforts tends to survive better than the version that unsettles, even when the unsettling version is the one actually written down. None of this means the softened image is malicious or dishonest in its intentions. But it does mean that what most people picture when they hear the word angel and what Ezekiel actually recorded are, in important respects, two different things. And that gap is worth taking seriously, not because strangeness is more spiritually valuable than comfort, but because the text itself seems designed to communicate something specific through its strangeness, something a softened image quietly erases. What the strangeness is saying. So what is the vision actually trying to communicate once you strip away centuries of artistic softening and look at the components themselves? Held together, the four faces, the bronze legs, the interlocking wings, and the moving fire seem to converge on a single idea: total, unbroken devotion to the throne they surround. Every physical feature Ezekiel records removes some form of independence, softness, or limitation, and replaces it with structure, vigilance, and coordinated motion. These are not beings who might get distracted, who might turn to look somewhere else, who might tire or bend or act apart from the whole. Everything about their design, as Ezekiel records it, points toward beings built entirely around the reality they surround. And what they surround, described later in the same chapter, is a throne like sapphire, and above it, a figure with the appearance of a man, radiant like glowing metal in fire, surrounded by brightness like a rainbow after rain. Ezekiel is careful, almost protective, in how he describes this figure. He does not claim to see God directly. He says it was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. Even the prophet who saw the four-faced creatures up close will not claim more precision than that when it comes to the throne itself. That restraint matters. Ezekiel spends enormous, specific detail on the creatures, the wheels, the wings, the fire, and then, at the one point where he could have said the most, he pulls back into careful, layered language. Likeness, appearance, glory. It is as though the vision itself is teaching a kind of theological humility. Describe what can be described precisely, and hold what cannot be described with appropriate restraint. The four-faced creatures are not the point of the vision. They are the architecture around the point, an architecture built entirely to display, protect, and move the glory that sits enthroned at the center. A question worth sitting with. There is something worth carrying away from all of this that has nothing to do with correcting religious art for its own sake. If the beings closest to God's throne were built like this, engineered for total awareness, unbroken coordination, and unwavering direction toward the one they surround. What does that suggest about the kind of devotion the text imagines as the norm around God's presence? Not a soft, occasional attentiveness, not a glance offered when convenient, something closer to total structure, every part of the being oriented toward the center, nothing left facing away. Most of us will never see what Ezekiel saw by that river in Babylon, but the text does not seem to have been written only to describe heavenly furniture. It was written to a broken, exiled, defeated people who needed to know that the God they thought they had lost had not vanished, that his throne was still attended, still guarded, still moving with total, coordinated purpose, even while his people sat in a foreign land wondering if they had been abandoned. The strangeness of the vision was never meant to distance the reader. It was meant to reassure a devastated community that glory this vast, this ordered, this alive, had not left them. There is a kind of comfort in that which the soft, familiar image of an angel can never quite deliver, because comfort built on softness only reaches as far as the softness does. A throne surrounded by beings, this vigilant, this coordinated, this alive, is a throne that cannot be caught unaware, cannot be overwhelmed, cannot be worn down by distance or time or exile. For a people who had watched their capital burn and their temple fall, that kind of unshakable, wide-awake glory was not a threat to be softened. It was the one thing worth holding on to. So the question worth sitting with is not really about wings or faces or bronze legs at all. It is about what kind of undivided attention a throne like that deserves, and whether the comfortable, familiar image most of us carry has quietly let us forget how serious, how alive, and how close that glory actually was said to be. If this changed how you picture what Ezekiel saw, consider going back to the text itself, chapters 1 and 10, and reading it slowly, in full, before you decide what you think it means. Some passages are worth more than a summary. This is one of them.